So thank you, former Representative Denver Riggleman, for joining me on Objections. Denver Riggleman, you're before becoming a member of Congress, you had a long counterintelligence career, and it shaped your view that at the end of your term. So let's start things off by talking about that. Uh, how did your decades of background in counterintelligence and disinformation lead you to make the speech you gave at the end of your term the way you did about warning, just to give a little bit of background for listeners, warning about the danger of disinformation?
Yeah, I think that was December 10th when I gave my farewell speech. And, that came a couple months after we finally got the QAnon resolution on the floor, Tom Malinowski and I, when we got that on the floor. And I think it's not only what I saw in 2 decades in counterterrorism. And I worked not only for Air Force intelligence, but I was in the National Security Agency, worked in the Office of Secretary of Defense, ran the Counter IED Operations Integration Cell, sort of target cell for NSA, going after Soleimani back in 2006, 2007. My company did telephony, high value target tracking. We looked at radicalization through ISIS and Al Qaeda. A lot of people know, I mission planned the first bombing runs to Afghanistan after 9/11. So I have all this vast experience just in the intelligence field and being a CEO. I know a successful CEO in this field and selling my company in 2012. And when I ran for Congress in 2018, I don't know if people know this. I don't know if you know this, but I was a senior consultant for electronic warfare and countermeasures at the Pentagon. The day I won, the day before, first of all, the day before I won the nomination, I never thought I would win that. So I was still at the Pentagon then. But really, I think if you rolled all that together, it's what happened to me in my own drive-through convention after I officiated the same-sex wedding when I was accused of being funded by George Soros. Now this is back in 2019, right?
Mm.
Late 2019, early 2020. And I saw it. I'm like, oh, what is this? And they said that I was trying to switch the sexual orientation of children. I was called the tool of the Antichrist. I was told that I was the general of the sodomite armies. I had all this happening, and I wondered where it was coming from. And the thing is, as an information or as an intelligence officer, I knew that if I played the game with these individuals, if I went along with these crazy conspiracy theories, if I never or if I apologized for officiating a same-sex wedding, if I went completely far right, I knew I could still win. I just refused to do it. And I think it was two things. So here's the answer. I think it's the fact that I knew what to do to win, to stay in Congress, to play to the base, but I was so put off and disturbed and horrified by it that I just refused to do it. And what I was trying to warn people from, gosh, in the conference back in late 2019, early 2020, when I started talking about that these conspiracy theories were forming this basis of bizarre messianic radicalization, as you fast forward to December 10th, I was saying that if we're always picking winning over this radical type of behavior and this super spreader event that we're having with disinformation, that it could lead to violence if we continue to pander to these type of elements. And even then, on December 10th, after I was condescended to, after my QAnon resolution, after the speech on December 10th, I had somebody pat me on the shoulder and said, Denver, they said, you're just paranoid because of your intelligence background. There's no way that something like this could happen. And I told that person, and I'll tell, and I'm right today. I said, I'm going to tell you right now, and I said this, there's an 80% chance of violence. I would think anytime around the transfer of power. And they said, there's no way. And I hated to be validated. And that's why I was so afraid of this, is because I had experienced it not only in my 2 decades of intelligence experience, but I had been brutalized by disinformation that I refused to bow to, that I fought back on for months and months and months. And again, I think it was those two things that combined that why I was so, I think, directed in my attack against QAnon and associated conspiracy theories.
And the conspiracy theories that were flung against you, the person who now holds your seat subscribed to many of them. He's a Congressman Good is now he was the one who had made a big deal of the fact that you officiated over a same-sex wedding. Uh, do you fear for your former district, which includes Charlottesville, which has seen violence from as we all know recently.
Well, he's marginalized himself with really almost an ignorant mythology because he called the pandemic phony, he called the election phony, but he hired and I'm going to tell you some things I haven't told anybody. He hired a religious outreach coordinator to go to the churches and talk about how I was evil. Um,
Mm.
so that was the fight that I had, was against not only the disinformation coming from Bob Good's campaign, which was run by some of the most awful people. And the fact is that they didn't want a primary because I was unbeatable in a primary in this district, and they knew that. I think that's why they had this drive-through convention, that Dairy Queen thing they had. But the other thing is that he hired people to spread disinformation amongst evangelicals. And we knew this was happening. And I think you're seeing that now, even in polling. If you look at it, the white evangelicals are really prone, and maybe not all of them, but there's a significant percentage that are prone to these type of theories. And I think that's our job, is to try to change that, with empathy, but with an aggressive push against disinformation. But I fear for the fifth district. To answer your question, yes, I do, because first of all, he's a laughing stock, right? And second of all, he'll never get anything done in Congress because nobody's going to want to work with this guy in a bipartisan fashion because, I mean, he has no idea about policy. He's just willing to say or do anything to get elected. If that means lying, if it means pushing Stop the Steal or QAnon conspiracy theories, or taking pictures with Marjorie Taylor Greene and saying how much she likes her, he's willing to do anything to win. And that's the problem with politics today, is it's a race to the bottom. And I just did not want to be a part of it.
Part of the reason that we're talking right now is, of course, the Senate impeachment trial is going on. You had warned back in December that this disinformation could lead to violence. What's your message to Senate Republicans now that the trial is going on?
Well, my message is going to fall on deaf ears because, in order to have a Capitol siege, you have to have a disinformation siege. And that happened for months and months. And a lot of people concentrate on November 3rd, and they forget before November 3rd that President Trump, that President Trump was tweeting that Joe Biden killed SEAL Team 6, retweeted that. He retweeted that Osama bin Laden had a body double. He retweeted Dominion Stop the Steal vote switching things after November 3rd. But before that, he was retweeting QAnon based conspiracy theories and also tweeting that the election was going to be stolen. He was fertilizing, or he was, I would say, preparing the battle space for himself to make sure that he had a ready excuse or the ability to fire people up after November 3rd because the polling wasn't looking good for him. So they said, well, how do we cheat? Or how do we show that it's cheating, and how do we cheat back? And that's exactly what they talked about, is how do we disenfranchise as many people as possible by having people believe something that's not only untrue, but dehumanizes other people. So this is something that was well before November 3rd. I'm a chief strategist for the Network Contagion Research Institute now. And we even proved back in May, and I know you're going to find this, you're not going to find this unbelievable. You're probably not going to, but the subpoena Obama, and President Obama will probably be interested in this. The subpoena Obama or Obamagate hashtag came from trolls, went up through this guy called E at Follow the 17. And less than 48 hours after this started from the dark corners of the internet, President Trump was retweeting internet troll conspiracy theories from his account. And we've proven this. We know this is happening. And I've said, people, I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall here. This has been seeded for a long time. And I say that SEEDING. This ground was seeded. And they just went ahead and they harvested that rage that was based on fantasy. They were able to weaponize insanity. And we saw that on January 6th.
And wasn't that the message of the Democrats' impeachment manager's presentation yesterday, that this has been seeded, as you say, for a very long time, that 6 months before the election, former President Trump was laying the groundwork for saying this election is going to be rigged?
It was a basic disinformation op. It's so easy to see with people who've done it for so long. And that's, but again, if you're not willing to see it, if you're stuck in your own echo chamber, if you've been radicalized, if you believe it's a cult or it's messianic, if you believe that President Trump was put here by God, if you are absolutely sure that there's a deep state of Democrats that worship Satan and harvest adrenochrome from kids that are being molested, if you believe those things, you don't care. And that's why I would say there's a significant portion of the population, no matter what facts I show, they're not going to care. They're there. And I know that it's pessimistic, but it's true. But I do think there's some that we can help, and I think that's why we need some kind of anti disinformation plan going forward, whether it starts educationally or not. But I'm sorry to say, um, I just don't see where there's a significant portion of the population that we can help right now.
Would you say that disinformation has been a sort of through line throughout the Trump presidency, long before, when from the very beginning, the messaging of the Russia investigation, for example, was that it was a hoax, and that the messaging with the scandal in Ukraine was that this was a hoax again. Um, it, it obviously this sort of escalated to a point that uh, few, but some people actually did see the January 6th siege, but hasn't this groundwork been laid from the very beginning of his presidency?
I think people become desensitized, even in political language today. But with President Trump, I think even, and I fell into this, I think there's no way, right? It must just be incredible inexperience, and, I said that, even during the first impeachment, I said either President Trump must have had the worst HR hiring strategy of all time, because it seems like he picked every grifter known to man. And I voted against impeachment the first time. A lot of it, there was some issues with the case. I read the whole Mueller report. I think there's some mutually exclusive things here between the two issues. But what I did say is it seemed incredibly unseemly. And people didn't find that, they weren't real excited, Republicans, when I said that there's obviously something here that we need to be concerned about. That I find it impeachable? No, but it seemed that, and again, I've always been troubled, and it was, but, I said, yeah, it had to be, there's just no way. And I think you saw that with some Republicans, and, and Adam and I have talked about it. Many of my friends here is that we're like, there's just, man, just as stupid. Maybe he just didn't know. This is just dumb. Right.
Mm.
But now when you look back on it, you're wondering how he ran this. Does he feel like he's some kind of mafia kingpin rather than president of the United States? The way that he utilizes individuals like Sidney Powell and Giuliani, the way that they manipulate the truth. And I say manipulate the truth, but they lie. But the way they, there seems to be this desperate escalation of crazy that started to happen. It seemed in late 2019, and it was concerning. And I could tell you story after story, about the things that I went through on my campaign, what to accept, what not to accept. But I think again that I was incredibly liberated after the same-sex wedding. And I think it really allowed me to say maybe I'm not a part of this team as much as I thought I was. And
Mm.
maybe it's because I think the Republican Party seems to be leaning towards supporting one individual rather than institutions.
Mm. With the in terms of the if there's a common ground between the two impeachments, weren't they both essentially efforts that were calling out attempts to cheat in an election? That with the first one, the entire premise of it was that then President Trump wanted to gin up an investigation against his political rival. And here we are again in impeachment number two, where there's another desperate effort to seize on to power. Are these both essentially impeachments on the same theme?
The theme is he wanted to win at any cost. I think that's what you're saying, right? That
Right.
there's no boundaries to do that. There's another theme though, that I think is equally awful. And I think this massive sort of dehumanizing grift that you saw happening. It seems like everybody around Trump was doing this to make money somehow, regardless of the circumstances. And I think when you have a conspiratorial grift, or you have people around him who are grifting, which was obvious during the Russia investigation. If anybody didn't think Manafort or any of these people were just naked grifters, or Flynn, I mean, come on, you know. And the crazy was there. I just don't think some of us recognized it in time. I mean, I can say that. But I think the grift is what really got to me, was how they went from monetizing fantasies to weaponizing them. And I think for a lot of people, and I would say there's a significant amount of Republicans, and hell, and I don't even know if I'm a Republican anymore. I don't even know what that means at this point,
Mhm.
the way the party's structured. But I think there's a significant amount of people who would call themselves conservative or constitutional conservatives, that saw this coming, that this was all about money, and no matter what, that money was more important than facts, and being reelected in power was more important than that. And I think that's the other theme that I've seen. And heck, right over my shoulder, I have the Mueller report book on there. And the theme was, it just seemed like grifters were attracted to this administration on a level that has never been seen before. And then those grifters got worse and worse until you had, people who are straight up loons like Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell. And obviously Rudy seemed to have caught it some kind of airborne stupid while he was in the same room with them. And that's what you got. And I think, though, the massive amount of immoral grift, I think, is also a huge theme here.
Knowing what you know now, and having gone through that experience of that disinformation campaign you experienced after presiding over that wedding, do you regret your vote after the first impeachment?
Looking back on it, um, I don't know. I don't think so. I think there was some awful things going on too on the other side when it came to disinformation or holding back facts. That at that point I was looking at it. It seemed to me there were two groups, and I think that's why I would probably still vote the way that I did, based on what they presented and based on the Mueller report himself. And I would say based on Mueller not actually coming up with charges. I think that was a huge thing in that impeachment case. I'll be honest with you. Um, when After reading the Mueller report, I'm like, that's the conclusion. That I mean, this is the conclusion of the Mueller report. You know what? That maybe he did some bad things, and it's true. I mean, I've read it, and so I was really sort of unsettled by that, and that's why I voted no. I will tell you this, though: I would have asked different questions to maybe get to better answers. Um, and that's what I've told people before, is that now that I've looked at how sort of this works, from how he does things, now that you got to remember, I was in Congress 2 years, right? I wasn't there from the beginning. But now that I saw how it worked, I wondered if I would have had different questions during that trial, or if I would have brought up different things. Um, and that's really what learning is about. But again, I think if people think that they can win no matter what, regardless of the circumstances, you can have bad situations. I think that's what we saw with this one. Um, I wish I could go back in time. I can't. But from what was presented, I don't think I would change my vote. But I will tell you this: there might have been different questions from what we know now.
What questions would you have had?
I think for me, it's exactly how the chain of command worked on the specific individuals that he had doing these type of interviews or works with Russians, or I would say, who was making more money off of this? Where was the money going? How did you hire these individuals? I remember reading in the Mueller report that, sorry, I know this a little bit, that he had hired Papadopoulos off LinkedIn. Well, who vouched for Papadopoulos? How did he even get into the hiring, line? Who actually was talking to Papadopoulos beforehand? And I think what I would have looked is the social network analysis beforehand, the history of that going back a couple years, and who was connected to who. I think that's what I would have looked at a lot more. And that's just based on my intelligence background, I think that's what I would have done.
And in terms of the Senate, should the Senate have investigated it further? For example, calling witnesses like John Bolton, if there could have been a redo. And I'm asking these questions.
Oh,
On
no, I
your,
know you're
yeah,
asking in good faith.
yeah,
I get
yeah,
that.
no,
Yeah.
no. But I mean specifically in your background of as an intelligence analyst, that someone who knows that there was that campaigns of disinformation, which is what was being alleged here, are deeply serious. Should the Senate have looked into that, considering that what was being alleged was an effort to cheat in an election?
You saw about going back in time now,
Yeah,
not this one specifically.
absolutely.
Um, I wanted to see witnesses in this trial. I wanted to see witnesses in the last one. And now going back again, it's hard to armchair quarterback myself, right?
Right.
But again, I think witnesses would have been good to see at this point. Obviously, there were some issues with the Steele dossier, which we know is true now in the FISA process, and that's the other thing I was stuck on. And I'll be honest with you, I think I was probably the only congressional member that's ever put forth FISA evidence. and the way that the FISA evidence line went down was absolutely wrong. That was actually one of the reasons I voted no, is because the process was so screwed up. And so that there were other factors for me that other people might not have had based on my background in FISA. So, but as far as Bolton or calling witnesses, in retrospect, we should have called witnesses. It's, I, we should have done it.
And just to probe this a little bit farther, because in talking about the first impeachment, you're talking a lot about the Mueller investigation, which seems to be a little bit more prelude to that. The
Mhm.
Ukraine scandal uh, appeared to, it focused more on what happened after that. This effort to allegedly gin up an investigation to kneecap a political rival. Was there anything about that case? What in that case did you have questions about?
When they released the call, and you're talking about the Ukraine crawl, and I think the transcript and things like that.
Right.
Again, there was head scratching going on there, but it didn't seem to rise to the level that actually he was going after Biden at that point. And that's something that I have argued about even with my Democratic friends, and I have a lot across the aisle. So on that one, I, I honestly thought the grifting in the Mueller report and what was happening there was more concerning to me than the Ukraine call. And again, that could just be my background, but I always found the Mueller report, and I voted no, but there are things on the Democratic side I disagree with, but I always found that, like, sort of the grift and the amount of money trying to make money of this more concerning than the Ukraine call. That's just the way I'm wired on that. And reading the Ukraine call, I said, man, don't say that kind of stuff. But it didn't seem to reach the threshold to impeachment to me as far as high crimes and misdemeanors at that time.
So one more question about impeachment one before we pivot to impeachment two. The Do you believe now, seeing the lengths that former President Trump went to ultimately to remain in power, that the basic crux of it, that this was at heart an allegation that Trump wanted to cheat in an election, is that more plausible to you in retrospect?
Today, I mean, the intent does seem to be there. What is it? Fool me once, shame on me. I mean, what? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And the intent seemed to be there. And looking at it, it was such a fuzzy case. It was an odd thing the way the Democrats went after it. They could have done a better job, obviously, at this point, looking back. But again, it comes back down to this, Bud, is that when you look at the phone call, which I thought didn't reach the threshold for impeachment, again, I honestly believe where it was really messed up was at the FISA level, but also at the dossier level, but also the way that they presented things and the fact that they were also being secretive in their evidence and they were trying to cover up who these individuals are. It seemed like both sides weren't quite sure where they were supposed to go with the defense or the offense on this. And I think it was that unsettling sort of nature of this that made me vote no. But looking in retrospect, you can always go back and say, damn, maybe there was other things going on there that we didn't even see or that we didn't even know to question based on what we see now. So it's a fair question. I can't go back in time. I wish I could, to be honest, sometimes, but it's a fair question. But I think you can honestly say, based on his actions today, there might have been intent there that was much more dire than we could have imagined.
Mm. And you agree and have said in regards to this impeachment that that intent was there. You believe that Trump really incited this insurrection and did that knowingly?
The proof is it's pretty damning. I mean, now you're talking about months and months of open source disinformation spreading that's everywhere. I mean, it's hard not to, to look at, like I said before, not just to stop the steal, but the other type of conspiracy theories that were propagated by the president, that were pushed by people around him. And I think people forget this. And I just like to remind people who was in the White House at the end here was the Sidney Powells and the Mike Flynn's and the Rudy Giuliani's that pushed this disinformation. That were the White House at the end. The reporting is he invited them, and that's why I guess it was as if there was no hiding here. This is what I'm going to do. I dare you to stop me. And that's what happened. And I think that's why impeachment, when you look at actual capital siege, you had physical violence and people that are dying. I think this case is so much worse than what happened during the first impeachment case. I think it's egregious on a level. You had people dying. You had specific types of threats and disinformation. And to the point when the tweet at 224 about Vice President Pence, and you look at all this, and again, like I said, it feels like I've been banging my head against the wall that this was just a classic disinformation campaign that radicalized people. And he picked that day, January 6th, to speak to them while they were certifying the electors. It seems like the chain of evidence was actually sort of like, I'm going to do it regardless. And that's what it is. And that's why I think this is just so much more dire and meets that threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors where the first impeachment did not.
As we speak now, it's unclear whether witnesses will be called and what the course of the future impeachment would hold. If you were prosecuting this case, if you can imagine yourself as a house manager of this,
Right.
what what would you, in your background as an intelligence analyst, uh, like to see shown to hammer home the points that you're making and what you believe about it?
I would have showed a timeline of every false piece of disinformation that came out of the president's office or off his Twitter, every single piece of it. I also would have shown some kind of social network analysis chart on every person who worked for them, how much they were paid, what they said, how many times they said it. I would have showed the complete disinformation timeline from soup to nuts. Working for the NCRI, though, I have a bit of a advantage since we have access to so much information on the Twitter side and on the social media side. Unclass, obviously, nothing untoward. But I would have showed the complete, I would say, social network chart that linked every single individual in Trump's orbit to the disinformation that was pushed. And I would go all the way down to people like Kelly Ward in Arizona. I would go to committees. I would go to every single person who made money off of this, the grift, the amount of money that was raised. Because really what it comes down to is people stormed the Capitol because they were radicalized through disinformation, through conspiracy theories, and it's easily provable. This is not hard. And that's what but I want to tell you this. I thought the impeachment managers did incredible. The case is pretty good. I mean, how dare, I'm armchair quarterbacking now, Jamie and Joe, and I'm not going to do that. It's just, I really like data. And I think it would have been really interesting if people saw all those connections and how many tweets from the people in Trump's orbit were actually put out there. And I wouldn't have limited to Twitter. I certainly would have hit Facebook. I certainly would have hit Gab. I would have hit YouTube. I would have hit Parler. I would have hit Rumble. I would have hit BitChute. Everything I could get off Telegram. I'd have done it all. And that's like, I think if people saw that, I think it'd be very clear, the spaghetti lines of crazy that led to this insurrection on January 6th.
Do you think that witnesses should be called? That decision hasn't been made yet, as we're
I
talking.
do. I really do. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think President Biden wants this trial over as fast as anybody, from what I've seen. There's other things actually happening in the world. I think also President Biden realizes he can't run on President Trump for the next 2 years. And also, I think they realize that the Republicans have a great opportunity to take the House back. So I don't think we're going to see any witnesses. I'm sorry. I just don't think we're going to see it. I'd like to see witnesses, but I think they're going to rest the case today. And I think you're going to have senator questions, and I think you're going to have a vote. And I think that's where we're going to be. And I think you're going to get between 56 and 59 on the Senate side. And you're not going to have a conviction. And then the Republicans will run that, the Democrats were on another witch hunt and that election integrity and pro-Trump. And then the Democrats are going to vote that they're going to go against the Republicans of the party of QAnon, which I think is a real, don't do that. I think if you run on policy and moderation and middle of the road and principles, I think you'll do a lot better. But that's what's going to happen. It's the same old, same old. And people do have short memories. And that's what scares me the most, man, is that people aren't learning from their mistakes. I always try to. And I just hope people are learning how awful it was on January 6th. My goodness, this was a time in our history where we honestly had a siege based on fantasy. We had people weaponized on something as crazy as going to look for unicorn horns. And that's what they siege the Capitol on. If we don't learn from this, it's going to happen again. It's going to happen again.
With if there were witnesses, however, who would you like to see called?
Oh, you know who I like to see called. I'd like to see Mike Flynn called, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, Jen Ellis, be a good witness to call. Put them under oath. See what they have to say about what happened behind closed doors. See if they actually believe this. And by the way, the people you're putting under oath are getting sued by Dominion and the billions of dollars for disinformation. And that's why I thought it's so incredible today that Rudy Giuliani was shown in the video as the one saying to fight when he's the one getting sued and led this ridiculousness of that somehow NSA or Chavez or Venezuela had something to do with stealing, or the Dominion was manipulating things. And about the NSA crap too, that NSA through Hammer and Scorecard, two programs for changing votes, put them under oath. Let's see what they got to say. And I'd love to be the one doing that questioning, to be honest with you, and not as a lawyer, but as an intelligence officer. And I think, again, that's the difference, is that they wouldn't know how to answer my questions. And I think a lot of them would have to do with, do you believe that Dominion machines were actually compromised? Go. And how? And why did you get Ron Watkins from 8kun, who is a QAnon organizer? Why was he one of your witnesses? Go. Tell me why. Was he being paid? Who was being paid? Who got paid? I would definitely go in to follow the money. So that's how I would do things. So I know it's a little harsh, but that's what I would do.
So you were talking about how President Biden might be tempted to just turn the page and get on to other pressing matters. Why is it important to get these witnesses up, to elicit that testimony under oath and to put them on the spot? Why does it matter? Because a lot of Republicans and also Democrats right now are pushing to turn the page. How do you emphasize the point that these uh, election fantasies need to be confronted in the most visible way possible?
I think it's listen, I never want to sound jaded. I don't want to sound discouraged. But I believe the political nature of this leads people to want to get through it so fast because of the midterms. It's exhausting to me, because I think another week of questioning witnesses wouldn't make that big of a difference. But I do believe President Biden's worried. Again, you're going to have a complete swath of the electorate still believing that President Biden isn't the legitimate president. I think this is taken away from him getting his cabinet positions filled. I think when you're looking at judges, all the things that he wants to do through the Senate, I think he thinks it's going to be very hard to work with people that have completely embraced the stop the steal mythology, or those that pander to it, like the Cruzes or the Hawleys, who are just, there's no way they can believe any of this shit. I mean, if they do, you have to call into question their mental fitness to serve. And pandering is just a political thing that they're doing. There's it's just ridiculous. But I think the American public, as far as the witnesses, need to see that they were completely duped. They were lied to. That President Trump directed the plan to lie to the American people as much as possible, and that he wasn't a victim of bad advisors, but that he was leading the charge to radicalize people through these type of ridiculous conspiracies. And I think that the weak-willed character of grifters like the Lynn Woods, like the Rudy Giuliani's, like the Sidney Powell's, I think they would fold like cheap kitchen chairs under real questioning. And that's just how I think about it. But on the other hand, I think that both sides want to get going because 2022 is around the corner, and I'm not trying to be completely politically just you know a pessimist, but that's what's going to happen. And we want other great things to happen, but I just don't see where they're going to call witnesses because both sides want to push down the road, and I think that's a shame. And I would hope that the American people do their own research, and that's why I believe we need some kind of centers for disinformation defense. We need some kind of private-public partnerships to identify those who are pushing disinformation, and we need to drag those vampires into the sunlight. We need to say these guys are just lying to you. And we don't have to shut them down, but we can certainly bring them out because we get to use our First Amendment rights to attack them. And I think if you have good analysts looking at open source information, you can identify these bad actors. And I think that would be really cool for the American people to see.
You attribute the big turning point for you in opening your eyes to a lot of what was going on with President Trump was the disinformation campaign that you experienced, and it gave you that sense of mission. What would it take to overcome the jadedness that you're describing, that to Get people to
You
see
talking about for
behind.
me now?
No, no, not for you, not for you.
Okay.
I'm talking about your advice, so that I'm saying if uh, so it doesn't take being personally the target of a disinformation campaign, because every member of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House was potentially the target of an insurrection, and
Yes.
these political
Yes.
calculations are still being made. How do you shake the sense of political calculation and convey, hey, these are the stakes, you are personally at risk, you are, whether it's through messaging or an act of violence?
I think the first thing I would say is I don't think that I meet the threshold for lack of self-awareness to become an effective politician. And I think a lot of these people that are running, and I hope I'm answering your question. I hope I understood it right. So I'm going to, if I'm not, just help me here. Um, I think that it's really easy not to be jaded if you think this is a career where you need to win no matter the costs. You've already sort of gone down that road. You have no other way to make a living except to leverage what you're doing in office. So, for instance, you got Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows gets out as chief of staff. He goes to work for a conservative think tank. He has no other job prospects. So, these people, they're in this ecosystem and they have to be there. And it's very difficult for me because I didn't have to have this ecosystem. And I think that just put me on the outs immediately. I just didn't want to be a part of it. And it gave me always a bad feeling. Every day that I was in Congress, I didn't have a great feeling. I had a feeling of sort of, am I doing the right thing here by actually being an elected official? And then I started to think this. The reason I haven't completely gone off to where I just want to sit on my 50 acres and sip bourbon on my back deck and spread distilleries and whiskey like love throughout the universe is I think that people that hate politics have to be involved in politics. And that's the only thing that's sort of keeping me going is that I don't mythologize myself. I'm not a superhero. I'm not a, and I think a lot of these guys, they've gone so far down the road of mythologizing themselves. They're drunk on their own bathwater, right? They've been drinking it for so long. And I'm not. And I think that's the thing is how do you get over people that are drunk on their own bathwater? And I think you have to have people from the outside to come in. I mean, and they're going to lose and you could get beat up and you could have things made up about you. And it's awful. I never thought it was awful. I remember when I said I was going to run, people said, don't run, Denver. You're going to hate it. I'm like, what do you mean, man? Look at me. I'm a charismatic, fun guy. I'm pretty smart. How great am I? What could possibly go wrong? How about everything? Right. So it was the most humbling experience of my life. Humility. I think that's it too, is that I'm just not by myself. It's just very difficult. And there's a few people out there that are starting to, doing really great things. There's people out there who were looking at QAnon before me. There's people out there that just have tried really hard. Everybody keeps saying everything happens for a reason. It doesn't. The only thing things happen is because they happen. It's how people react to it. And I think I don't want to quit completely because I feel like if I did, after serving my country in the military, after doing this, after finding out who I was as a person in the political arena, now I've learned so much. Do I just throw that all away now? And you always have a lot to answer for in service. You always try to do the best thing you can right at that moment. And I've made mistakes. But the thing is, I made mistakes with who I was as a human being, thinking I was doing the right thing. And I think that's a lot different from people who make mistakes because they just want to win or they want to manipulate people. You need good people to get in. So if I can convince some good people to run, even though it's going to ruin their lives, I might try to do that. Will I run again? Maybe. Do I want to run again right now? No. It's that awful. I think I'm so aware of the fallibilities of what a human is. And how, and it's based on years of intelligence experience too, and how easy it is to be duped. I can be duped any day. Anybody can. But I haven't completely quit because I still think that maybe people who just want to try to do good things have a place here. And if they do, those people need to be involved. And I hope they are. And I'm still smiling. I'm still standing. I didn't, haven't had bullets shot at me yet, even though I had the death threats, right? But not yet. So I'm still here. And I'm going to do the best that I can to help other people, to tell them that there's disinformation out there, to try to say that these last 4 years really was a case study in how somebody sort of they not only it was a conflagration, that they stoked the fires more and more and more over the 4 years based on desperation and power rather than what's best for the American people, and then gaslighted the 74 million people plus that voted for him after the fact to say this election was stolen, to radicalize them, to seize the Capitol on January 6th based on his own influencers that he was directing to make sure this happened. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. It is a classic disinformation campaign. And now that I've seen this escalation in the last 4 years, it's hard for me to walk away. That's why I might be jaded, but I haven't completely quit yet. I hope that was what you were trying to get to.
I think that's a great note to end off on. Thank you very much, Denver, for joining me again. And I
Thanks.
appreciate always our conversations and your help and expertise on this